Alright, it's Vancouver Canucks time. Welcome back to Scouching's NHL Prospect Pipeline series. There's a really interesting group of players here for Vancouver. They have been in and out of the draft over the last little while, but through it all and drafting around the middle of the first round a lot of the time, I think they've done a decent job adding some really intriguing players that should be able to help this team become more relevant over time, at least I hope. There's nobody really in the franchise or the core tiers for me, but there's a few really solid options in the depth category. Leading the way, I wanted to say the other Elias Pettersson is in here, and this is not really necessarily because I feel like he's this massive steal that's going to be a huge role player for this team, but he did crack the NHL roster here and there this year, and from what I saw, I don't think he looked that out of place. This is a guy who I could definitely see being a bottom pair, sort of minutes-eating guy who maybe isn't the flashiest dude in the world, but he's pretty big and skates pretty well and keeps things relatively simple and safe, and I think is a pretty good example of the type of player that maybe I need to value a little more in the draft. It's just a matter of, as always, where you draft these types of players. But Pettersson has come along faster than I expected based on what I remember, and he has worked his way up into this tier. However, we'll see where he is if Vancouver becomes a playoff team anytime soon, and if he is an everyday player when the team is in that position. But the three other guys here probably shouldn't surprise anyone. Jonathan Lekkerimaki, Tom Willander, and Braden Coots. I've knocked Lekkerimaki down a peg. He's getting a little bit older for the pipeline here, and I just haven't seen the results at the NHL level that really give me any more confidence that there's a really high-end overall NHL player there, but a very good goal scorer who could be an excellent complementary scorer in the NHL night in, night out as soon as this season. I could very easily see that. There just is a lot of things with guys that score a lot of goals and don't have a whole lot of assists where as you pay attention, you notice maybe why that might be. And I think Lekkerimaki has always been one of those players, but I do think he could be a player in the NHL that does do that, but in a good way, scores a bunch of goals, and maybe is a bit one-dimensional or maybe a little bit limited, but you love having him on the team regardless. Tom Willander is a guy that I've also always really liked. I don't think I would have drafted him as high as Vancouver took him, but a solid middle-of-the-lineup defenseman he absolutely could be. I'm not sure if it'll be as soon as this season, but I guess you could say there are some job openings on the defensive group for the Vancouver Canucks this year, potentially. I think Willander is a player who I took a lot of flack for my thoughts on Axel Sandin Pellikka in the Detroit video, and I go back to the World Juniors this year, and all eyes were on Axel Sandin Pellikka, and in the offensive zone, that's for good reason. But I think Tom Willander is a really good example of a player that plays off of a player like Axel Sandin Pellikka extremely well. He's not the most offensively daring and confident, crazy offensive defenseman that you've ever seen, but he does have that skating ability, a skill level to him, a relative ability of getting around the ice, chipping in at both ends that just elevates the abilities of those guys like an Axel Sandin Pellikka. And I think at the World Juniors, if you took Tom Willander away from Sandin Pellikka, he probably would have played really well. And if you took Sandin Pellikka away from Willander, I think there's a little bit of a risk that you might open yourself up to some defensive gaps when your line is out there. But again, they're both very good players, but I think Willander could be a really solid everyday NHLer. And I think the same thing about Braden Coots, who they just drafted this past summer. I've really liked Braden Coots. In all honesty, he was one of the better defensive workhorse centers in this entire draft class to me. I think this was a draft class filled with guys that may very well turn out to be third-line centers, and considering some of these players went 4th, 5th, top 10, to get Braden Coots where they did, who may very well have a similar ceiling, even if he is a little bit smaller than those other players, I think is a great pickup. I think his offense was better than his points might indicate since his team kind of struggled to generate offense. There were some really good creative moments offensively. I thought his under 18 was really good. So I think this group of 4 players at the very least should be everyday NHL players for Vancouver. I might be the least optimistic about an Elias Pettersson, but based on what I saw last year, I could easily see it. There's a lot of interesting players in the maybes category too. I really loved the pickups of guys like Matthew Lansing, even a Kieran Durbin this year. Sawyer Minio had a really solid season in the WHL, but I still am not sure about everyday NHL output. I liked the Gabe Sherratt pickup, all things considered. Maybe not the most incredible player, but based on what I saw post-draft, an interesting pickup to say the least. Ty Young had a very successful year in the East Coast League in net. Alexei Medvedev has always been a goaltender this season that I've liked watching. I would expect him to play a lot of games for the London Knights this year, and We'll see how that goes, but overall, I'm not totally sure about all of these guys being everyday NHLers. Ratu is in here, and I do feel like there definitely is an NHL player there somewhere, but it's gonna really come down to coaching or the system you want to deploy, because I feel like he's just a player that's too good and too successful in the AHL right now, but still just kind of struggles to find a role in the NHL that really works. But similar to a guy like Pettersson, whenever I saw Ratu play for the Canucks this year, I thought he looked pretty solid. He might not be the top 6 guy people thought when he was 15, 16 years old, but I do still feel like you really don't want to throw him out with the trash at this point. If he's a guy that ends up on waivers, I would probably take a swing on him and see what he can do at the bottom end of a lineup, work his way up, because I think there's some good stuff there, and we'll see how this year goes for him. In the everyone else category, there's not a whole lot I really want to go over. For my definition of a prospect, Kukaskinvuo is reaching the end of the timeline, but he had a pretty solid year in college hockey last year. I've liked Kirill Kudryavtsev's output. He cracked the NHL a little bit here and there, but I don't think he's a long-term mainstay in the NHL. There's still maybe some hope for guys like Danila Klimovich, but I'm not betting on it. I've never been a huge fan of him, but he is a capable goal scorer, and he's doing an okay job in the AHL right now. I do like the guys down at the back end that they've got. Basil Sansonens and Parker Alkos are 2 guys that I've always just enjoyed watching. I feel like they're maybe these guys that have a really solid style of play, but just can't quite hang in the NHL, but they might have a career similar to a guy like an Elias Pettersson, where they just take little baby steps over and over, but always positive ones, and end up depth NHLers. But I think these guys still have a longer way to go than a guy like Pettersson did at this age, but solid players. I've always liked watching them, even if they aren't the flashiest guys around or the highest end potential players. So the Vancouver Canucks are going to be another one of these teams this year who get a 2A. I think all things considered, top to bottom, there's just a lot of solid players here. I don't think there's a lot of really high-end potential steals, enormous value picks that they've made over the years, but I do think that there is a group of players here somewhere that can round out the roster for the Vancouver Canucks pretty well. They've got a couple of interesting goaltending prospects, and overall, considering this is a team that has been a bubble-ish team or a really good team a couple of years ago, they haven't drafted super high very often, and I think all things considered, they've come away with about what you could expect for teams with a mid-first round draft pick. Solid, middle of the lineup players, maybe some decent swings later on, but this is also a team that hasn't drafted a whole lot recently, so we'll see how it goes for them. But all things considered, interesting group, and definitely some interesting ones that might graduate as soon as this year. And with that, we're going to call it. If you liked the video, definitely like and subscribe. If you really liked it, definitely consider a subscription over at Scouching.ca, where you can get access to all kinds of fun data tools and our Discord server, and plenty of other fun stuff that you're just not going to find anywhere else on the internet. So check that out at Scouching.ca. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.